Hey guys, welcome back. I'm Jordan. I help people expand their minds, get in touch with themselves and their sense of self-care and wellness. And today I really want to talk about shadow work, shadow self, and this whole concept, because as far as I understand from a lot of different people in different cohorts that I know, it's understood to be a very esoteric concept. When people talk about shadow work, it's like the really mystical people and witchcraft and like shadow energy stuff. But the reality is, we all have a shadow self. And this has been something that has even been rooted in psychology for years. Carl Jung went on to talk about it as the side of ourselves that our ego ignores in order to survive, because the ego doesn't like to think about things that make it uncomfortable. So therefore, this builds on what I was talking about in my last video about stopping ignoring emotions and feelings and then having them fester into something deeper later on. And that literally turns into something deeper rooted in shadow work. I have it written down here. I'll just turn around the camera so you can see. The feelings, emotions, and traumas we let our ego ignore become our shadow self. And I have it drawn here as like a little guy and then the unhappy guy behind him, because it's all about understanding that that's the side of ourselves that would make our ego unhappy to have to face. Because it's true, our traumas and our feelings that we don't like to ignore are hard to face. I'll get a little real with you here. I mentioned in my sacral video, I told a really big story about my depression that I battled last year and how that was something that was really hard for me to work through. That was a big block last year. And I told the story to explain about feelings and blocks with feelings, because depression is a really big block that can result from not working through your feelings and not working through things that you need to work through, which can lead to just an absolute crash in mental capacity. So I've been there. And for me, my big thing that I went through with this was at the end of school. I was just finishing college last spring, and for me, it was very rooted in the fact that I had just gone to school for 3 years because of upgrading, but I had just gone to school for a 2-year diploma in kinesiology, and along the way, I had also gotten really, like my spiritual awakening really happened, and even I was spiritual-esque before, but everybody knows, if you guys have been through that, there was always a defining moment where you went from kind of spiritual to really spiritual, and your eye was open, and all of a sudden you're doing these things and trying things out. And anyway, while I was in school for kinesiology, in which I had gone in to become a personal trainer or a dietitian, and something very simply grounded in health, and my masculinity wasn't fragile because of that at all. It wasn't confronted or conflicted at all. But while I was in school, I had gotten my Reiki certification, and I started to really expand myself, and I also took mindfulness while I was in school, and I really started to expand my method, my way of thinking, and I got to a point where by the time I was done school, I didn't even want to be a personal trainer anymore. I didn't give a crap about helping people just with exercise. It was so much more than that. I was coming out of school with this sense of absolutely just wanting to help people with wellness and mental health and and mindfulness and real holistic health, and really get to the root of issues and use and wrapping it all together. But something that I didn't realize had turned into a really big shadow for me was this paradigm that I happen to live in Red Deer, Alberta, and it's kind of like the Texas of Canada, and in this whole passion path of deciding that I wanted to be like a holistic wellness coach, life coach, and really, really help people make a difference in self-growth, I all of a sudden hit a wall. I hit a snag, and I got really depressed for a couple of months last summer, and it was really brutal, and I had to really look and say, what is this? And it was my not being able to look in the mirror and think about what I was doing and who I was versus where I was, and being afraid to be seen, and personally it just sent me into a deep spiral, and it was some really hard shadow work for me, because as a man it was dealing with toxic masculinity around the place that I live and the work I wanted to do, but doing it anyway, and I had to, this was a lot of shadow work that I had to really do, to look in the mirror, look at that shadow of toxic masculinity as a man, as a spiritual man, and that's something that I think a lot of men can relate to, is when we're waking up and we're getting into our spirituality, we're embracing different sides of ourselves. And that in itself includes looking at different aspects of shadow. And for me, that included looking at toxic masculinity and what that meant for me. Masculinity, while embracing my divine femininity and loving pink and purple and loving baths and loving life. None of those things are necessarily innately feminine. It's about embracing all the aspects of life. And for me, embracing all the aspects of life was scary, because it included embracing something that was very rooted in the core of where I live. And that included giving myself permission to be somebody that maybe wouldn't be accepted, but maybe is what the community that I'm in needs. I mean, it is. I know it is. But for me, it was something that I really had to work through. And I wanted to share that, because I really want to share and get that feedback and not just deliver content without sharing my perspective at times, because we're all human and we can all relate with each other in different ways. But as a dual Reiki therapist and self-care and wellness coach, I really am passionate about demystifying this idea that the shadow self is something esoteric or out there, or it's witchcraft or something. Because the fact is, although I am very spiritual, it is so grounded in something, in psychology and in something that exists in everyone, despite your spirituality, despite who you are, where you come from. There is this innate part of all of us that we're ignoring and that we have to face in order to grow. We're always going to have you're never going to outshine your shadow self. That's important to note too, because we're always, as we grow, we're always going to have shadow self will change. And as you learn from one thing, then, 10 years from now, the things that you need to learn from are going to be different than the things that you have to learn from now. But that's not to say that you're not still going to have some form of shadow even then, after you've potentially gone through a lot of self-work and growth. But the point is that we all have a fluctuating side of ourselves that we more than likely or not what we should acknowledge before we can move forward. Acknowledge so that we can move forward. But it's also important to remember that this happens for everybody at the time that it needs to happen for us. And it's not something you need to rush, but just to know that that exists for all of us. It's self-work that everybody can do. And it's something that we're all capable of navigating, whether it can look different for anybody. Sometimes we need to see a coach or a therapist or some sort of a professional in order to work through those things. But in some senses too, sometimes our shadow is just things that we needed to be more mindful of, and they're just things that we can work on ourselves. And it's important to understand that the different range of our shadow self and necessary shadow work can potentially be done by us or by anybody that you might need to see. That as long as you acknowledge that it needs to be done, you're well on the way to working with yourself and working on that growth yourself. And that's the first step, is just taking that step and acknowledging what kind of work that you need to do. What kinds of things have I been ignoring all these years? What kinds of feelings don't I like to think about? And you know what? Let's even take that as an opportunity right now, just to sit back and take a few seconds. Breathe into that. Hit the pause button right now if you want, if you have a pen and paper, and jot down a couple things that you don't like to think about, whether that means feelings or experiences or any particular memories, whether they're traumas or just feelings or memories. It doesn't matter. This is for you. This is a chance for you to just acknowledge them, and then you can decide whether these are things that you can start to work on and be mindful of in your own way, or whether some of them are things that you need to really see somebody about. Like I always say, if you're free to comment or shoot me a message. Find me on Facebook or any of my other platforms. My links are always in my info, and my other any contact info is always there, and I'm always open to talk to anybody. I don't just put this information out there to fly it out there and then say that I'm not totally reachable. If anybody wants to reach out and talk to me about any of these things, or if you ever want to set up a one-on-one session with me, I'm okay with that too. But I hope any of this has helped just really understand and demystify it, to really understand that we all have a shadow self. It's just that part of ourselves that we don't like to face, and as soon as we look at that, at least, we can, like I had said to, as an exercise, we can just look at it and know what there is to deal with. And that starts to be the first step of shining a light on the dark. So if you like this, like it, comment down in the comment section, subscribe if you like that, if you want to do that too and you want more content like this. And if you really want to reach out to me. I encourage it. I love you guys, and I hope you have a great weekend.